The issue of voting rights in America is probably among the most serious and significant issues that we are facing at this moment. And voting rights for people with disabilities is one of our highest priorities in that context. Let's see the people in terms of how folks live their lives and how will these restrictions impact the people's right to have their voice reflected through their vote.
That was Vice President Kamala Harris at the White House today, meeting with advocates for disabled Americans, a community disproportionately likely to depend on the kinds of voting methods like mail-in ballots that the GOP-led assault on voting rights is trying very hard to get rid of. From a Washington Post opinion column this week, quote, preventing people from being able to vote from home is a direct attack on the civil rights of people with disabilities. With more than 38 million people with disabilities eligible to vote, this is a formidable bloc with the power to influence election outcomes. Intentional or not, these bills threaten a movement that's been building for decades and puts the rights of Americans with disabilities on the line. Joining our conversation, Dessa Cosma, a Michigan voter, a social justice and disability activist, and the founding director of Detroit Disability Power. She was in that meeting we just showed you a little bit of today with Vice President Harris. Donna Edwards is still with us. I wonder, Dessa, if you could just tell us what you heard, and then I'll ask you to tell us what you shared.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity. It was such a delightful meeting. I mean, it was a heavy topic, but it felt really good to be able to share our lived experiences as disabled voters. We were a diverse group of disabled voters coming in with stories about our own experiences, stories of those that we know and love who have experienced challenges voting because of inaccessibility at the polls, as well as because of some of these new voting restrictions. We're very nervous about what this means for our community, and to be in a meeting where we were able to share and be heard and strategize for better outcomes was felt really good.
Dessa, what are the specific aspects of the voting restrictions that impact Americans with disabilities the most? We talked about the mail-in voting, but I know there are other measures that would criminally penalize anyone that aids anybody. Can you just take us through the parts of the laws that concern you the most?
Sure. There are so many voting restriction laws floating out there. We've been discussing that. It won't be a comprehensive list, but what I can tell you is the more options voters have, the better that is for disabled voters. You know, disability is so incredibly diverse. I myself am a wheelchair user, so my needs at a polling location are different than my blind friends or my deaf friends or my friends who need assistance filling out a ballot, right? So anything that restricts options, whether that's limiting drop boxes, limiting drop box hours, limiting drive-through voting, anything that criminalizes helping people vote, those things are not just options for disabled people. Those are actually accommodations. And we are entitled to accommodations in voting. We have a constitutional right to vote independently and privately. And the ways that we are able to do that include some of these very things that are now being taken away. And so we're concerned about this, and we're prepared to fight them.
Dessa, what assurances, if any, were you given from the vice president about their optimism or commitment to federal voting rights legislation that would undo all of these laws?
I definitely felt like we had an ally in that meeting. I mean, the fact that we were pulled together and listened to in the first place is not something that always happens for members of our community. You know, as you said earlier, there's 38 million voting age disabled Americans. We have the potential to be very powerful and influential. But like other marginalized groups, if we're not able to engage in the democratic process, it makes it very hard for us to use those democratic processes to improve our quality of life, which is desperately needed across the country. So to be in a meeting where we were authentically engaged, we were asked questions, she was taking a lot of notes, she was digging in, she was acknowledging what she doesn't know about our lived experience and vowing to take what we say to heart and to continue the conversation. All of that was extremely heartening, and I do feel like we're going to be moving in the right direction with this administration.
Donna, this does feel like a more intense phase for this White House of engaging the stakeholders, using the bully pulpit, a quicker pace of meetings. What do you think?
I do, and I think it was particularly important to have this conversation with the disability community that is often not a part of these conversations when it comes to things like voting rights. I know that in my own experience, I'm limited in my mobility because of my MS, that standing in a long line, leaning on my cane and waiting to vote would have been horrific during COVID and social distancing. And so the ability to fill out a mail-in ballot and send it in made all the difference in terms of accessibility to the polls. And so, as Dessa has said, the range of disabilities and of disability of the 38 million people who live with disabilities is so tremendous that it's really important for this White House to engage each one of these communities to make sure that our voting laws really don't negatively impact or hinder a huge community and their ability to participate in democracy. And so good on you, Dessa, for your participation, also advocating for all of us. Thank you.